All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I'll say a few words about Arts and Nature Social Club because there's a few new faces who haven't been here yet. And so Arts and Nature Social Club is a non-profit, in German, a 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝗏, a charity. So we were founded in 2019. I'm one of the founding members, and the idea is to use the arts as a vehicle to empathize for the topic of sustainability in nature, because a lot of the time sustainability issues are being addressed on the mental level, I would say, and not so much on the emotional level. And so we bring in different speakers from different realms of life and look at very different issues from a sustainability perspective. Mostly more of an environmental focus. This time tonight will take a more of a social angle. Obviously, it's all connected. We run about 10 to 12 events per year. We are just in the process of setting up new chapters in other cities, ranging from Munich to Hamburg to Vienna and Lisbon. There's some interest as well. Marrakesh, that's right. That's another one that is on the map. And we are a members-based organization, and we welcome new members. If you're interested, members get in for free. We open up most of our events to the general public as well, as tonight. But we have a minimal overhead as a nonprofit. Most people work on a volunteer basis. But as you know, when you run an organization, there's always some costs that need to be paid. And that's where members and memberships really help us to pay our bills, so to speak. So talk to me or Magda or Mickey, our club manager, in the back later for questions about Arts and Nature Social Club. And I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight in just a moment, but special thanks also to Carsten for hosting us again tonight here at DataSpace. DataSpace used to be called, or is still called SAP DataSpace, but they host a range of different organizations for different kinds of events. And if you would like to say a few more words about DataSpace, you're of course welcome as well. You can do that now or later. Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. And yeah, if you want to get up during the talk, you can do so. Just be quiet and grab a drink. Want to make sure you feel comfortable. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Johnny Miller, who I've known for a few years, but we got to know each other a bit better over the last couple of months. Johnny has been here to Berlin a few times. He's still formally based in South Africa, grew up in the United States, and he'll share with us his personal story, how he got into social inequality, into the kinds of images, the aerial photography he takes. He's got many awards. He's an Atlantic Fellow, a member, responsible leader at the BMW Foundation and various other groups, and he can also share a few more insights on that. And as you all know, South Africa, as he will further elaborate on, is considered one of the most unequal places on planet Earth. And so where the contrast between rich and poor is particularly strong, but it's not a single case. There are many other countries as well that share, unfortunately, a similar fate. So we'll learn about that as well. And yeah, so Johnny, he'll show us some slides, some photographs that he's taken, and share his personal journey and story, and some more insights, maybe what can be done against some of the injustice in this world. So very much looking forward to this conversation. And so he'll talk for about half an hour. I'll ask a few questions, and you're welcome to chime in with your own questions later on. So welcome, and yeah, let's get started.
Thank you. Thanks, Jörg, for the introduction. That was very beautiful, and it's great to see all you here. Thanks for coming out tonight. I want to start, and I don't know, although I'm speaking in Berlin, I'm sure someone in here has been to Cape Town. If anyone has actually been to Cape Town and seen this image here, because this is what you see on the promotional marketing, the postcards for Cape Town. It's beautiful. This is the Atlantic seaboard. So this is the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean's on the other side. And what you're looking at from about 1950, when apartheid era zoning laws and different forms of exclusionary laws came into effect, in 1994 was whites only area. So this is the most productive, the most beautiful, the most expensive part of the city. But the part of the city that you don't see is where what we would say in South Africa, the colored, Black, and Indian or Asian population needed to move during apartheid. So this is a demographic map. It was from the 2011 census, and the different colors represent the different racial groups. So you can see in the South African context, we have 4 racial groups, and the white people are the purple, and they live in the nicest part of town. So near the mountain, near the ocean. This is getting out into like the wine area. This is a big mountain here. So this is like the nice where they grow wine. And then this area here is called the Cape Flats. If you've ever flown into Cape Town, this is the airport right here. This is like sandy, not very good soil. You can't grow crops. You can't really build. It's just kind of a wasteland, and it has been for hundreds of years. Historically, this was always just kind of like an in-between section of the city. And that's where the yellow here is colored people. Historically, a lot of them lived in the CBD, and Black people, historically, a lot of them came in from the Eastern Cape, needed to move. And what I thought was really interesting studying at University of Cape Town was the boundaries between the racial groups, not just that they had been forced out there, but they still lived in these very clearly circumscribed areas like Langa there, bounded by these highways, and there's a industrial park up there, and then like a strip of trees on the left there. And as a student, a master's student, it was just like a spark of imagination to me that there was a bunch of men, probably white men, sitting in a smoky room, drawing on like an architectural board where people needed to live and what needed to be put in place to keep them separate. That to me was fascinating, because sometimes we think of inequality as organic. These things just kind of happen, right? But I really think, I mean, if you look back at how this was planned in the South African context, and it's different everywhere in the world, it probably came down to quite a few like small numbers of groups of people sitting around these rooms. So I wanted to see kind of what this looked like from the sky. 2015, drones were brand new. They were quite expensive in the South African context, so no one really had them. And a lot of people that did have them were flying around Table Mountain trying to do like the most beautiful videos on YouTube, like most beautiful city in 4K. I don't know if you remember that one. It got 10 million views. And I thought it might be interesting. And also as a photographer, I was really interested in expressing my voice with the drone somehow, to do some sort of journalism with it. And so this is an area called Noordhoek, and I surf right over there. It's quite a beautiful area. It's very rich. You can see the purple dots here. This is where a lot of white people live, a lot of expensive homes. There's a colored area there that was a township during apartheid. And then this was an informal settlement that occurred after apartheid. It's almost all Black Africans. There's 38,000 people that live there. And it's quite difficult to see when you're on the ground because of these fences. South Africa is a dangerous country. I think I can say that without any blowback from any South Africans in the room. It's got a huge crime rate. It's dangerous. So everyone lives behind these fences with like electronic wire at the top. So you can't crawl over a barbed wire or something. But you also can't then see what's on the other side. So from the ground level, this is kind of invisible. And to me, the drone, and this is actually where I parked in 2016 when I had the drone for the first time, allows you to fly over those walls and then get directly to the center of what I considered this, I don't know, very emotional image, let's say. I don't want to put any words out there without you developing themselves inside your own heads. But to me, it was a series of movement that these people that were living in these shacks. And really here, on that right-hand side of the image is all tin shacks. That's all completely informal. On the left, it's more homes with shacks in their backyards that they use to rent out or whatever, but the ones in the wetlands there are shacks. And then approaching this kind of electrified fence around this really nice neighborhood, to me was like again, I don't know, some sort of hordes coming towards like the castle in medieval times or something like that. And I wanted to know like what this represented. I put it onto Facebook, and I didn't have very many followers on Facebook at the time. I had 200 followers, let's be honest. I was not giving talks in front of people at the Arts and Nature Social Club, and it went viral. So I don't know if anyone's ever had anything go viral before, but it's a very strange phenomenon where people, all of a sudden, the spotlight is on you briefly. So anything that you've ever written on your Facebook page, you can imagine the fear that that would instill in you, or your Twitter page or whatever, people now are looking at. And so to me, when I woke up in the morning and it had like 1,000 shares, almost 200 comments, and it was just going ding, 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 ding. What I thought, okay, after I got over my initial fear, what I thought was really interesting was that people didn't know who I was. They didn't know if I was white or black or left wing or right wing. It was just this image that I put up, and then the caption being, I'm going to start a project on inequality. I'm a photographer. So people were able to read into the image what they saw and then have a conversation about both sides of the spectrum on my page. So it was really interesting that this firestorm broke out also, and people they didn't hold back. They were saying that, you know, these the black people on the left-hand side here were you know, not trying hard enough, or whatever kind of racist drivel they were putting onto my page. And then the people would say, well, you know, like, white people really aren't so bad because they're just trying to survive, and they have that electrified fence because of crime, you know. And then other people were going, this really represents the injustice of the whole situation, this one image. And it very quickly like went off into international context. So CNN and The Guardian picked up this image. And I realized there was this opportunity. There was a real thirst to visualize inequality, because it's a concept, even when we're talking about it now, 7 years later, everyone in this room probably has their own idea of what it means to say inequality. So this is, in a way, a particular type of inequality, either wealth or architectural or opportunistic type of inequality, but there's all sorts of other types of inequality also. So it was a way to hook onto it visually. And I think looking straight down also helped it spread on social media. These types of images work really well because you don't need to be an expert to understand what you're looking at on a small screen. So I think in particular, Instagram and Facebook, not so much Facebook, but definitely Instagram, these images really, really went viral. They did really well. And I played with that aesthetic. And every image that you'll notice, the more popular ones from the series are always looking straight down. And by the way, just from a photography point of view, it's only the drone that allows you to do that. If you wanted to do this before with a helicopter, you'd need to hire like a really expensive cinema gimbal or something that you mounted on the nose of a helicopter that they used for movies. But no one has access to those, right? Especially not in a Southern African context or like a context with slums like this. So when the drones came out, technologically, they have a gimbal on the drone that allows you to swivel the camera and look straight down. It was really the first time that, in a way, humans could look straight down on the Earth without needing to go through satellite providers or a government or these really expensive solutions. So the use of the drone technology was actually, in my opinion, quite democratic also in terms of these ways of looking at the Earth. This is in Durban. So I took a road trip through South Africa at the time. And in Durban, this golf course is named after an Indian golfer who received his trophy. He actually beat Gary Player. Does anyone play golf in here? Does anyone know Gary Player, the golfer? Very famous South African golfer, best at the time, supposedly. But this Indian guy, 𝗵𝗺 𝗚𝗲𝗍 beat him in 1967. And he went to get his trophy, and a rainstorm came in off the ocean in Durban. And all the white people ran into the clubhouse to get away from the rain and the thunder and the lightning, and he wasn't allowed in because he was Indian. So then there was a photographer there, and he caught the moment when 𝗵𝗺 like received his trophy in the rain, pouring rain, and all the other people were inside the building. And that photo was one of the first moments where I think the world really woke up to the injustice of the inequalities in the sporting world, specifically in South Africa. And a lot of South African athletes and associations were then banned from international competitions. So after '94, they named this golf course after him. So it's kind of like a historic golf course in a sense. And the irony then is that there's this huge slum right next to the fifth hole here. So this was like the winner of the Istanbul Photo Awards. It was like a very popular image for a while, also in Johannesburg. Johannesburg is a city, the largest city in the world, not founded on a river or a lake or an ocean. And the reason why is because it was founded on top of a gold reef. So Most of the gold in the world from like 1900 to 1950 or so came out of South Africa. And large parts of Johannesburg are actually mine dumps and like dusty areas where like the soil had been taken out and put down. And after 94, a lot of the informal people that had not been able to live in the city because of these restrictive zoning laws moved into the city and then took over those old mines. So you have like a fairly wealthy community here with swimming pools and big houses, and then just this absolute poverty with this running sewer you can see in the middle here. South Africa is, by most people's accounts, the most unequal country in the world. This is Cape Town. Going back to Cape Town, Cape Town is very famous for its wine industry and these historic Cape Dutch buildings. It's a very typical look. On the other side, you have thousands and thousands and thousands. And each one of these shacks sometimes has 5, 6 people living in it, of people. So just to recap briefly, when we're talking about inequality, sometimes people have interesting ideas of whether or not inequality exists. So how do you prove that in the data? That's one question that people have. Does this actually exist, or is this kind of like a figment of your wokeness, right? Is this something that's like a hot topic, inequality, right? That's number one. And then number two, are there solutions, or is this like a natural state of affairs? And if there are solutions, do we want to use those solutions? These are all interesting questions, and I'm sure all of you very smart people have your own interesting ideas on both of them, but at least the data is fairly clear, which is that in most countries, large countries, specifically the countries that are the most liberal in terms of how they've deregulated and how they've opened up large parts of their economy, for example, the finance sector in the States or other, non-state sectors, or dismantling state sectors and giving them to the private market around the world, around the OECD. It started around 1975 or so, and up until now, you can see the top 10% national income share has gone up in almost every country except for China. That's because China raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. So actually, they became more equal in that sense. But if you get into the granular data of the last 5 years, China is beginning to become more unequal again as the rich get super rich. There's a lot of reasons for this, but basically in most countries, including Germany, the rich have gotten richer. Also, it's just a matter of math also. I mean, if you're getting even just 4 or 5% return on your capital in a bank account. I mean, I saw Elon Musk a couple of days ago was just offered $1 trillion pay package if he improved the stock price of Tesla. He's already worth $430 billion, but he might get another $1 trillion in stock. If you have $430 billion in a savings account at Deutsche Bank or whatever, and you're getting 5% on that, the compounding interest phenomenon, right? This magical phenomenon of compounding interest, and Thomas Piketty wrote about this in his book Capital in the 21st Century, basically means you're already gone. You're already off at the races and you've already won. So a lot of the solutions that people talk about, in my opinion, are not going to work, right? In terms of redistributing, unless we get really crazily revolutionary. And that's another sort of topic that we could talk about. Also, income growth, you can see the difference in the inequality between, for example, sub-Saharan Africa and either North America or Europe is also pretty tremendous. So there's a huge inequality also between how much money sub-Saharan Africa is gaining every year in income and North America. You can see that the graph is pretty clear that it's going to be really hard to catch up. So what I wanted to do once it became clear that this was such a project of immense interest to people was travel around the world and showcase that to people so that we could put images to this data and we could show it's not just South Africa's problem. It's not just this basket case country that some African country at the end of the earth is dealing with, and then we forget about it or we kind of close our eyes. I really wanted to go to the north. I haven't been really anywhere in Europe, I have to admit, but North America for sure, Mexico, Canada, a bunch of places like that, and show that it's a worldwide problem. So I really like this image in Panama City with the people swimming here. And then this fence, this is like a traditional fishing village. And that's, again, not Photoshopped. None of these are Photoshopped. That's just a long lens showing the extreme inequalities in Mexico City. The Mumbai pictures went very viral as well. So still I get a lot of hits on my website. If you type in Mumbai into Google, my images are on the first page. So that image is probably the most used image of all time of the series. Islamabad in Pakistan, really interesting. These are Christian colonies in the planned city of Islamabad that service the Muslim people that live in the houses there. It's a little bit of a reversal from a lot of other countries where we see immigrants from the Middle East and other Muslim countries like servicing the houses of white people in Europe or North America. Manila and Bogota in Colombia. That Manila image is really interesting. It's, I also work with art galleries. That's why I'm in Berlin. And this is by far the one that people are most interested in. That all burned down also. That community on the right-hand side there burned down over Christmas. So there's a lot of temporal issues in the photos as well. They act as data. They act as discrete moments in history that then provide evidence for other things that come. For example, fire safety or the movement of people into and out of cities that I'm finding very interesting as this project enters its 8th year. Bangkok, this is the largest slum area of Bangkok, a very dynamic, rich city. And in Jakarta, I don't know if you've seen right now, there's huge protests in Jakarta over income inequality, over privileges and corruption that the ruling class has in the government. And these houses are, I mean, look at this one. These are just huge, insane homes in Jakarta, multi-million-dollar mansions, and right next to like really poor areas along the golf course and the river right there. This is currently trending on my Instagram page also. It's really making the rounds in Jakarta right now. Nairobi and Buenos Aires. One of the interesting things about drones is that you can use them to create maps. And I'll show you another example of this image in particular. So when they were building this road through the middle of Kibera, Kibera is probably the most famous slum in Africa, perhaps, but The Constant Gardener, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. But anyways, it's a famous slum in Nairobi that they built a road right through the middle of. And I was there at the time, 2017, and they weren't consulting the people that lived there. It was just like, Nairobi needs to grow. The road is going to go through, move. And they did it. So one of the things we did with African Drone was document that process with photographs and journalistic activity, and then also create a map before and after so we could really see exactly what was lost. I'll talk about that in a minute. Again, this isn't Photoshop. This is, it's called the Wall of Shame in Lima. The Peruvians, actually this is a Jesuit college. So it was actually a Jesuit college. It was all natural back up until about 1950, 1960, when a sort of group of people wanted to start settling on the mountain, and the Jesuit college was worried they were going to spill over into their fields where they're growing things, and the college is down below, so maybe they felt uncomfortable with that. So they literally built a wall right up the mountain. And the wall doesn't just stop here. I just think that's a cool photo, so I stopped it. But if you widened out the frame, you'd see the wall continues up onto the crest of the mountain for a few kilometers, actually. So they really made sure it was like, you're not going on the other side of this wall. And it became known as the Wall of Shame because of this treatment of, or maybe the treatment of people within society in Lima, this sort of like social ostracization of poor people in a Latin American context is especially kind of galling, I think. But yeah, I really like this image because it is so black and white. Also, the time of day that I photographed this, now that I'm looking at it, is just because a little bit of a shadow on that wall, just enough to kind of make it look like a photoshopped image, which I think is cool. I've done a lot of work in Brazil. This is not an image that I normally use to showcase Brazil, but I wanted to show other elements of inequalities that I'm working with. This open pit mining is really important to the Brazilian economy. This is a gold mine in Minas Gerais, and the people that live in these neighborhoods are both affected by the pollution and the exploitative working conditions that Vale, the huge mining giant, and Rio Tinto, these huge mining companies, exploit them from. They're also at risk of mine collapses, because if you mine in an open pit way like this, you take out muddy water, and then you use hoses to kind of like wash out minerals from that water. So you're left with a lot of residual toxic water, and it turns into mud. And then they build dams that are filled with this mud, and occasionally these dams break. And so in this area of Brazil in 2013 and in 2017, there was 2 mine disasters that the first one killed a few people and totally wiped out an ecosystem. And the second one killed 260 people and also wiped out a river valley. So this is just, it's a incredibly difficult issue in Brazil because these people also need to work to eat at these places of work too. So the issues of inequality are not just easy to solve. They're not just strictly exploitative. They do provide like a sustainability for the communities around them too. It's almost like a parasitic symbiosis in some respects at the most exploitive levels of capitalism. I think mining's a really good way to see that. And also, I mean, Jorg, in terms of your work in terms of the climate and environmental issues and impacts, mining is a tremendously visual phenomenon that I like to explore as well. Swakopmund is in Namibia. It's just visually a very interesting place. Lagos, this is the world's biggest floating slum in the lagoons in Nigeria. It's between 300,000 and 500,000 people live in these floating buildings here. And actually to get out here to take the photo, I'm in one of these canoes. You have to go through 5 different kings. Literally, they call them kings. And you have to hand money to them like gatekeepers as you take your canoe through this slum called Makoko. It's quite interesting. And then lastly, Valparaiso is in Chile. Very cool city, very unequal city. Chile in general is a very unequal country, most unequal in Latin America. Also the richest in Latin America. So those 2 things generally go together, funny enough. And then in San Francisco, I took this during COVID. I'm sure people in this room have been aware of the homelessness crisis in America. There's a lot of ways into inequality in the States. We don't have necessarily slums and shacks like this, but homelessness and infrastructure and redlining are just as prevalent in the States as they are in Southern Africa. So finding an inn to figure out an image that works as a photographer was more of a challenge in North America, but it's still doable. And I think this just is really sad, to be honest, as an American, that in one of the richest cities in the world, not only America, and this is City Hall in San Francisco, we have to create these sort of like cattle-looking 2-meter distant homeless shelter things, which actually is probably an improvement on how most people are living there now, to tell you the truth. I'm from Seattle originally, my hometown Seattle, and it's just as bad in Seattle. Tons of homeless people living under bridges, even still. In the richest country, I mean, in total in the world, not per capita, but one of the richest countries per capita also. Finally, in 2019, this image of Johannesburg was on the cover of Time magazine. And that was a really important moment for me, I think, because it sort of represented a lot of the work that I had done and the hard work to get to this point of reaching the minds and the hearts of people who were buying Time magazine, kind of middle American, people that were interested in these issues, but not necessarily economics type people. This also came out the week of the South African national election. So it was kind of a, pardon the pun, like a turd in the punch bowl of the party there. And everyone was like, wow, I can't believe they decided to run this image on the week of our elections. It's quite a black eye for South Africa. And the ANC, the ruling party, Nelson Mandela's party, the ANC, African National Congress, did really poorly in this election. They also did really poorly in the last election. And I think you're going to see in the next election them potentially lose the majority. And that's a huge upset and shift in Southern African politics, South African politics. These are all the cities I've been to. 37, I think. And yeah, I'd love to go to a lot more, but this is a good visual of kind of where I've been. I go through a process, and people ask me all the time how I find these cities. There's not that many unequal scenes around the world, I have to admit. If you want to get crazy, you can find inequalities anywhere. You could do this project where you have, social classes or sexuality or I don't know, whatever, a variety of different differences in populations. But for me, looking with a drone at wealth inequality as expressed through architecture, there's not that many. So I find on Google Earth these locations, and then I ask myself, like, is this interesting? Is this going to look cool? And that's a big barrier as to whether I go to that country or not. once I say, yes, this looks cool, I then go to the second one, which is it relevant? Like, is there some sort of story here that I can talk about? This is, for example, a data map of COVID deaths in Mexico City. So some of the places that I found on the map were right where the blue and the red come together, and that's where the huge difference between who died and who lived during COVID is represented in the data. And if I can match the Google Earth image with that image, then you're starting to tell something, right? Then you're starting to actually provide evidence, like telling a story. And then is it actionable? This is the one that I feel most maybe uncomfortable with, but I'm trying, which is on my website and a variety of other things that I do. For example, the Atlantic Fellowship here, trying to create behavioral change, provide options for people for more information and options for how people could alleviate these scenarios. Couple things too. I mentioned this. Remember, this is the first image that I ever photographed. Going back over time is really interesting. So one of the cool things about this project is I don't think it's ever going to end because, for example, this here in 2016 looks totally different in 2020. Looks totally different in 2024. So just to go back through there, everyone in South Africa, I would say, not everyone, but a lot of people would say, okay, this is how it looks. There's people in 𝗪'cy𝗵𝗿𝗄 and there's people in 𝗏𝗪cel. They're separate, end of story. Not really. Like 𝗪'cy𝗵𝗿𝗄 is growing like crazy. So there's that. But then there's also, if you look at the top left here, issues of fire. So all those shacks burned down in a big fire and they rebuilt them there in this like more elaborate looking grid there. There's a variety of like interesting things that come out of taking photos over time as well. You can see the sporting grounds in the bottom left there are also improved as well. What happens when they reach this fence, I think, is the big question. Yeah, probably. Oops, another fire. This is Kibera in Nairobi. I mentioned to you they were building a road. This is before the road and then after the road. The cool thing about drones, I think, there's a lot of cool things about drones. I like drones, but they embed GPS coordinates in every photo. That's how they work. So if you take a photo here, there's a GPS point baked into that photo, which means that you can take a lot of photos, like 1,000, and then the computer will put them together into a grid and merge all of the images into a map using photogrammetry. So not only do you get a map, but you get a 3D representation of this area. You can use that for like, I don't know, a variety of reasons why you might want that, like a flooding data or, you know, proximity to hills that might have a landslide or something like that. And in this case, in the Nairobi case, I wanted to use it as a map because then I can provide this map to humanitarian OpenStreetMaps, and then they can go in and they can do the actual hard work of mapping out, okay, were there schools, clinics, homes, roads that were destroyed by this road, and now because we have this map, we can see they're not there anymore. Like you can see this school here was like the side of it was kind of cut in half. Actually, no, I'm sorry, that's actually that one. It was another school up here. But anyways, it was basically cut directly in half. And now we have a map, we have evidence of that, which you know, can be helpful to community organizations. Very few, I'm not saying that Michael's organization doesn't do this, but very few satellite providers will care because there's no real economic benefit to go in and make these types of satellite maps available at this resolution to journalists. It's just not a very good business model. So going in there as a person who represents African drone or as on my own as a journalist is actually quite valuable because at the time, at least, drones were not easily found in Nairobi. This was 2017. Like I mentioned in Mexico City, that's the two sides, the COVID map and then what it looks like there. So I've been working with, for example, neuroscientists in Trinity College, Augustine, my friend Augustine there you can see, where he's gone in and taken my images and mapped them onto the research that he's doing in terms of the incidences of dementia and Alzheimer's in populations. And one of the interesting things that they found, I think it's really interesting because they've done these studies all over Latin America, is that the most unequal Latin American countries have the highest incidences of dementia and Alzheimer's, not just in the poor population, even in the rich population. So that basically means that the more unequal your country is, the less healthy your population is. It's not just about the poor people. So it's not that just because these people are poor, they're less healthy. And that's really important because the number one problem that I see working in this space is that people think inequality is a good thing, or they see it as like a natural slippage perhaps in how economies work and populations. Some people just have to suffer in order for the rest of us to succeed. And I mean, if you want to know my own thoughts on this, I kind of agree. There needs to be some sort of social mobility in dynamic economies, which may involve a certain amount of suffering at the bottom ends of the population, which you can alleviate through social welfare programs. It's not like those people need to suffer completely, but having a North Star as to where you want to go seems to be pretty important for dynamic economies. And you see that, for example, in Europe versus the States. Even though America is much, much more unequal, there does seem to be an innovation and dynamism edge that America has on the EU sometimes, and people use that, and not that I agree with this, people use that in the US context to justify the inequality. This is showing that even if you do think that, you're still undercutting yourself, and we have the data from COVID, and now we have the data from Alzheimer's to show it's really shooting yourself in the foot. It's very short-sighted. You may be getting rich, but you're getting unhealthy. I just want to leave you guys with the current state of unequal scenes and what I'm doing here in Berlin also, which is developing we don't really know if it's an augmented reality viewer or if it's going to be a VR viewer or if it's going to be an app, but basically a way to take my images, go inside of them, and provide a more interesting, in-depth, immersive experience with perhaps people's stories. And right now we have people who are prototyping this app. Actually, tonight he sent me a couple videos of this, and I hope to have it at least to be able to show as a minimum viable product by Berlin Science Week. So I'll be speaking at Berlin Science Week in November, and hopefully you guys can come and see me and then see this. And I have some ideas of certain stories that would work really well in terms of immersive journalism using AR and VR, which I don't know how you guys feel about AR and VR, but as a journalist, as a photographer, I'm really excited about new technology. I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool photojournalist who has like a Leica and shoots in black and white. No, I'm like, give me the latest, greatest technology and let's do something cool with it, right? So I think the drones, that's how I use drones, and it was a big win for me. I think it reinforced that as a good notion. And then I think AR and VR, even though it seems to always be this thing where it's just around the corner, I think we have turned a page, and soon this is going to be a big deal. So thank you very much. This is my Instagram and website, and yeah, looking forward to chatting with you guys.
Thanks, Johnny. A very rich presentation with a lot of information and questions you raise. And maybe as a starter, what do you think are the parallels you've observed, or the differences between social inequality in different countries?
I think as an American, it was really important for me to be able to go back to America and say to people that I'm working on a problem, I'm working on a project that touches your lives here just as much as it touches the South African lives in Cape Town. And that's this idea of like foreignness to the concept of inequality is something that I want to try to eradicate, because it's unhealthy. I think it actually in the long run undermines the social compact. I think very clearly we see that in the States right now. With the rise of Trumpism and the rise of this bifurcated political climate in the States. I think a lot of that does have to do with social inequality, that people just feel that they're exasperated and latching on to the people that are offering quick solutions and divisiveness. So these things are not easily extricated from each other. And you see the rise of right-wing populism in not only, Europe, you see that in Southern Africa, you see that in Latin America, you definitely see that in the States. So this idea that while the architecture may not look exactly the same, there are other parallels. And as a journalist, you can pull those out in interesting ways and put them together into a project, I think was, something that I've worked really hard to do. So hopefully it's successful.
I feel I'm a bit far away, so I'm coming a little closer. And another thought that came to mind, there's now the late Hans Rosling, a Swedish researcher. He he took a positive approach, whilst most people in the sustainability world, things are getting worse and worse all the time. But he wrote a book called Factfulness, when he looked at different social developments and health data, etc., across the world. And he felt, especially as far as poverty is concerned, things are actually getting better. And in comparison with your graph that you showed earlier, do you feel that's also true? That's another perspective, or from your own, let's say, ethnographic work, what do you feel like in that sense?
Yeah, that's like the #1 argument I would say that people trot out when they try to disprove this idea that inequality is a bad thing. I've heard this a lot. This story of capitalism is this story of success, an incredible amount of wealth that's been unlocked through capitalism, and it's true. It's not like I'm saying that that's not true. And millions of people have been raised out of poverty. Millions of people have extended their lifespans. I think the lifespan of the average European was something like 46 in 1900, right? And now it's above 79 or 80 or something like that in Germany. So the idea that there's been a lot of innovation and successes from capitalism, that system, is not untrue. I think the difference, though, is that it's unfair, which people hate to hear because it sounds like a moral judgment. But I think unequivocally it is unfair that as the rich get richer, the poor will stay the same. And that's what that data showed. Even if their lives is better than it was in 1900, it could have been a lot better if we distributed more money. There's also this concept that we could also be richer. So if you just take it in purely economic terms, the data is a little unclear, but you can make the argument that, for example, economies would be more dynamic and they would be more healthy, and the social compact would be stronger, and populations would be healthier in more economically equal countries. And you see that borne out in the data in Europe. You see that borne out in the data in inter-regional data as well, like Europe versus Southern Africa or Latin America. But it's a tough one. And for example, as someone who works in this space, but who has an eyeball on other spaces, right? An eyeball to how other activists approach different issues. I think the climate movement has done an excellent job in rallying people around ideas of what's the solution. So numbers and mottos and activations. And everyone knows, or everyone used to know, that like 350 parts per million, and then it went to 400 parts per million was like the limit. And everyone knew that 2 degrees Celsius was the limit, right? And we had all these COPs, and we had all this amazing data and activations in London and here, I'm sure, with Extinction Rebellion, and people were really passionate, and they got everyone around to that issue. Do you remember? It wasn't so long ago. I remember this. People didn't believe in climate change. They literally did not believe in it. That was like 15 years ago in America. It seems insane now, and I'm sure there's still some people who don't believe it. But by and large, people agree that it exists now, and agree that there are accepted metrics through how we can change it. And then they just say, we don't want to do those. Sorry. Like, I'm going to keep buying plastic and putting petrol into my car. But that's something different. I think in the inequality movement, we haven't even decided on what the metrics are as to whether it's a problem and what the solutions are. So right now, people are just behaving as if, like, I'm just going to continue living my life because it's pretty good, right? Capitalism's pretty good. So we haven't got to the point like the climate movement got to, where we need to sit down and say, okay, we want a 20x multiple between the highest paid and the lowest paid employee at a company, publicly traded company, for example. Or we need a wealth tax. Or we need to create a progressive taxation system across income tax. I could have shown this graph too, which is really interesting. America used, and I'm sorry to keep harping on America, but it's really good data, and I'm also American, so bear with me. America, the marginal income tax level for the highest earners in 1950, do you know what it was? 90%. That meant that the highest earners in America gave away 90% of their income in 1950. By 1970, that was down to about 30, and right now it's somewhere, I don't exactly know, but it's somewhere between 28 and 34%. As a sort of middle income earner, I pay 28% taxes in the States. So you can imagine that, like, I'm a middle income earner, the highest earners are basically paying the same amount, which is more or less 28 to 34%, somewhere in there. And it just doesn't really make sense. Social Security, all these other like investments that we need to make as societies are not getting funded. And the argument is that it is booming the country's economy, right? The stock market is always up. That's what people always talk about. That as a big solution, is that, well, the stock market's up. But the stock market doesn't serve very many people, right? I mean, it provides an engine of wealth to some people and investment, yes, but it also doesn't serve the whole population. So these are complicated, convoluted topics and solutions for sure. But in general, like, I hope to be doing this better with my work with Unequal Scenes, coming up with a standard that people can look at and say, that's what it is, that's what I believe in. These are the images that prove it, and then go forward from there. Yeah.
I mean, as you're rightly saying, it's very complex, and GDP is an easy indicator because it shows one figure and it tends to grow. So it's always good news in some ways, for the most part. But yeah, I mean, I also keep wondering to what extent, because inherent in capitalism is a degree of individualism, and which is cultural phenomena. You've got, you know, when you look at cultural studies, you see America is one of the most individualistic countries. And I would say that trend or disease or whatever you want to call it is spreading as well. You know, the me culture, featuring yourself on social media, etc. I mean, I mean, throughout you know, your work and you know, traveling around, have you observed that there has been an increase in the individualism, and that may contribute to some extent to the phenomena you've been observing?
I think it's too easy of an answer, but it's a nice straw man argument to agree to. I mean, I do think that there's a problem. I was actually listening to a podcast the other day, and they had a self-help guru on this podcast. She was an American self-help author. Sorry? No, Mel Robbins, actually. But yeah, Brene Brown's a good example too. But like, basically her motto was kind of like, you shouldn't care what other people think. It was like a neo-stoicism kind of logic model. It was kind of like, just do your own thing and don't worry about things you can't control, which is basically how other people think and how they treat you, right? Like, and I thought that was, and the hosts were agreeing with her and everyone was having a good time. And I remember thinking, if I was still living in America, I would have been like, yes, that she's so clear and lucid, and that's exactly the model that we need. You need to lift people out of, you know, their own complicated minds or whatever. But having lived abroad for so long now, it strikes me as so obnoxiously American. This idea that you shouldn't listen to anyone else, no other opinion matters. What matters is you, the ability to make the most of yourself and pull yourself up by the bootstraps, even if you have to step on people to get there, is, I think, a really easy way to say that's why America is so unequal. But South Africa is one of the most communitarian societies, if I can say that. I mean, 80% of South Africa is Black. And the Black culture in South Africa is extremely communal. I mean, down to their banking systems, down to the way that they organize villages in the Eastern Cape, down to, I don't know, religious practices, communal religious practices, stuff like that. Brazil is another good example. A lot of Latin American countries are extremely communitarian and leftist in terms of societies compared to the States. So I'm not quite sure that it's so simple as to say that because America's individualistic that it's unequal or inequalities related to individualism, but they make good bedfellows for sure. So I don't know if that.
I mean, any positive developments you've witnessed in different countries? I mean, things that have been improving, and if so, why? Can other countries learn from them?
I think there's a lot of amazing work that's been done in terms of bridging these infrastructural and architectural divides over the last 30 years or so. Even in South Africa, parks, bridges, tearing down walls, it's happening in the States as well. I know it's happened in Europe. We're sitting in a city where there used to be a huge divide, right? And a lot of inequality, and that's all been really beautifully taken care of in some respects. I know that there's still a divide between East and West in Germany, but what I mean is specifically in Berlin, there's a lot of really beautiful ways that people can navigate the space that used to represent such a horrible divide. I'm talking about parks, walkways, different ways of memorializing that I think we could see as a real success, right? We could see as the best of humanities represented in certain respects. We have all these amazing stories of Nelson Mandela being liberated from prison and a variety of reversals of horrible oppression and apartheid that happened in the middle of the 20th century. But I think people are very, especially in a hyper online, the developments are coming with AI and with just technology so quickly now that we're so hyper fixated on getting ahead right, of either our neighbors or other countries to become more innovative, more dynamic. And absolutely, one of the best ways to become more dynamic is to streamline and privatize your economy, right? It's quite stodgy to work in an economy that's state controlled by and large, or has a lot of regulations. So to strip away a lot of those and to increase inequality does seem to make our economies more dynamic. But is that short-sighted? I believe so. I mean, in 30, 40 years, are we going to be then trading those sorts of trade-offs for some sort of bifurcated Elysium type society where we have the hyper-rich that we can never catch up to? And that was my point with the phenomenon of compounding interest. We will never catch up to Elon Musk. And I know I'm rambling a little bit, but there's one more thing to say, which is, and I don't know if it occurs as much in Germany. There's this phenomenon in America too, where you associate with extremely rich people much more closely than you associate with extremely poor people. Even if, definitely on a linear scale, even a logarithmic scale, you're closer to the very poor. So there seems to be this like forward-looking association with aspirationally where you want to get to in our minds. And I don't know, again, maybe you could tell me if that's a German thing as well, but in the States, absolutely.
I mean, the American dream, I guess, to some extent.
Yeah, but have you ever come across someone that's kind of like, oh, it's not that big of a deal that he's getting $1 trillion payout, because he's building value in the factory, and then all the shareholders also get value, or, you know, I'm also getting paid. And you can tell in the back of their minds, they're like, maybe one day my app is going to become $1 billion idea, and I don't want any sort of breaks on the amount of money that I could assume as the CEO one day. I see that I know there's a lot of people in this room now that are familiar with Silicon Valley. I thought that was a very typical mindset of the Silicon Valley founders when I was out there a couple of years ago. It was just this idea that, like, why shoot yourself in the foot prematurely when I could be in that position in just a few years, even if the statistics bear out that you will much more likely be either middle class or below middle class if it doesn't work out, right? And for most people, it doesn't work out. So yeah, it's a human nature issue as well, I suppose.
Any questions in the audience? Yeah.
Mike. Thanks, first of all. Very, very interesting. My name is Kunal. There's in between to slums and the rich people, and this is where I was born. So my question is, I have two questions. One is more on the reflection side, past and things, and one is forward-looking. So the idea that came to me when I looked at those pictures is most of the countries have a colonial past, if not all. So what's your reflection there? Is it somehow related that all those countries have had, rich people looting and everything, and the social injustice actually started from there? And the other question that I have for you is, are there societies, countries that you see have eradicated completely or are about to the inequality, and which systemic changes they made, and can we learn from them? Are there any blueprints out there? Norway comes to my mind, Sweden, Finland comes to my mind. And so there are examples where we can really make it very actionable. What have they done better than the others? So that's probably, I'd be interested in insights there. Thank you.
Thanks, great question. Where did you say that you grew up? Oh, in India, cool. Well, absolutely, 100%. This is a representation not only of inequality, but of the extractive imperialistic network of colonizers that spread out throughout the world in 1400, 1500. Even America was a colony, right? I think it's embedded in our DNA as Americans to think that way about our own country, about the indigenous people that were exterminated there, and about the resources. And you see that in, even today, opening up drilling in the far north in Alaska and places that we considered sort of resources to exploit more than natural areas to protect, at least in the American context. There's also been a lot of amazing data at the LSE, specifically some of the researchers there, showing the vast, vast disparity even today in terms of the net inflows and outflows between the so-called global south, but specifically Africa and Europe and the global north. One good example is just raw products, raw commodities like copper, gold, a variety of other minerals that are shipped raw out of places that don't have the capability. They don't have the factories, they don't have the skilled labor, or they don't have the electricity in some respects to actually process those and refine them, which is where the most of the value capture is. So those get sent to places in the global north. Diamonds is actually a good example of this, although India has turned the corner on this and started to capture the value in refining diamonds. But for example, for a long time, South Africa didn't have that capability. Botswana didn't have that capability. So they would send their raw diamonds to somewhere else, Antwerp, for example, and they would cut them, they would refine them, and they'd sell them for a huge profit. So that profit capture is at its core a capitalistic endeavor, right? To buy a product for the lowest possible amount and sell it for the highest possible amount. And in between, you have the grist, kind of like the things that are getting ground against the millstone are the workers, the laborers. That's an uncomfortable truth for even the most progressive European, I think, is that Europe is participating in the system and that we're basically having our foot on the neck of many, many people around the world through that system. Let's not even talk about the IMF and the World Bank as well. And also I'll admit this to you guys, I do work for the World Bank occasionally. Sometimes the IMF or the World Bank buy these images from me. It's a hypocrisy, I understand that, but I also need to survive as a photographer. But the practices of loaning money to developing countries or not absolving third world or global south countries of the debt that they accrued during colonial times, not absolving them of that, they still have to pay at a really exorbitant rates, and the terms that they dictate for them in terms of how their economies need to be reorganized to be able to get those loans in the first place is extremely exploitative. So yeah. And then the last point you asked about countries that have, they're like shining examples of reducing inequality. I think actually Norway is a bad example because of this amazing boon in oil that Norway found in the North Sea. But I was thinking as you were speaking, there's a couple interesting examples from Southern Africa. And even though South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, in traditional black areas, let's call them, during apartheid, black people had to live in what's called homelands. Anyways, there was a banking system that developed in those homelands. And I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head now. It's a Xhosa word, but it basically was, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. It was called a 𝗏𝗏𝗏. So if you had a certain number of people, and usually it was 12, so I don't know if that was a base unit or if it could be bigger, everyone would put in money to enter the 𝗏𝗏𝗏, and then that would be a lump sum. And then every month, one of the 12 people would get that lump sum as kind of a windfall that they could then use as investment or something. So basically, you didn't get interest, and you didn't invest in the stock market, but you did get this windfall once per year because of the 𝗏𝗏𝗏 system that is anti-capitalistic, right? So you're not making money, you're not charging interest, and you're not making interest, but you are using the power of the collective to empower communities through this sort of collective savings program. And Tanzania is another good example. I can't remember the name of the president, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, I think, the name of the president in the 60s and 70s, who came up with this idea, and it's all rooted in communist ideology, to be honest. And I don't know how you guys feel about communism. I mean, it certainly had a checkered past and has its, shining examples of great uses of communism in certain respects, and it's obviously horrible and turns into other things when it doesn't have a good outcome. But one of the best things I think in Tanzania, the use of that was this unit system. So there was a variety of concentric circles from the smallest unit, which was the village, and how decisions were made collectively, and there was always like a chief or some sort of leader at each one of these unit levels, up to national government. And that concentric circle of decision making and this kind of community ideology of instead of having a top-down decision being made or like a massive grassroots movement, you had these little concentric rings that got bigger and bigger. And I think people saw that as really a success in terms of post-colonial organizing in the Southern African context was the Tanzanian case. So that's another example, but I don't know, there's a lot, I guess. Maybe I'll stop there, but yeah, thanks for your comment as well. And did you grow up in Mumbai? Oh, okay, cool, yeah.
Hi, is this on? Is this on? Okay. I'm Jen. And first, thank you very much for your phenomenal work. It's amazing. And I also, as a fellow American, want to thank you for poking Uncle Sam in the eye. It's healthy. We need this right now. You spoke about the inequality movement, and you also mentioned the environmental movement and what you admired. And I'm wondering, in the Venn diagram of these two movements, where do you see your work? And how do you think your work can contribute to maybe a merging of these two a little bit more?
Well, first of all, I'd like to think of myself as like working on a spectrum of actors. So it's easy to get caught up in this idea of like speaking on stage. It makes you feel very important, I have to admit. It's cool, right? But the idea of me being this like minion in a lot of amazing, more successful and smarter and more resourced actors is definitely not lost on me. So I'd like to think that I can maybe occasionally change some sort of view or advocate for sort of political viewpoints with these images that other people can't do, but then all the other work that needs to come with changing behavior is being done by this spectrum, right? So there's that. But in terms of the Venn diagram and in terms of the environmental movement, I do think they're linked. I think it's at its heart is this sort of extricating natural resources and exploiting them. Is at its heart very capitalistic, and I think inequality is a byproduct of that. And we're moving towards more, at least for the last 10 years, 15 years or so, towards that side of the political spectrum. So there's a renewed interest in my work and the work of a lot of amazing environmental defenders. And perhaps there's a way there that I can help. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of data. Let me say this. There's a lot of data. If you're a data person or if you're ChatGPT, I think these questions are fairly easy to understand and answer, but we're not. We're human and we make decisions on emotions a lot of the time. And also, if you can show something that's relevant to you, that's why in my there was like 3 things that I put there. Is it interesting? Is it relevant? Is it actionable? Is it relevant is actually probably the most important one for getting the message out there. Because I've seen my images that are just of poverty not go anywhere. And it might have been the most desperate situation in Southern Africa that I took these documentary style photos in, but if they don't go out, if people don't see them, nothing happens. So this idea of creating relevant images that also go viral, that can then be applied to the environmental or inequality movement, I think is maybe where the strength of communicators comes in. And I don't know if there's any photographers in the audience right now, but sometimes I speak to young photographers, you know, and students and stuff like that. And they're like, well, how can I make a difference? How can I do this and that? And there isn't, I don't think, a good way to encourage someone without just saying you have to try a lot of different things to get lucky. And I think I'm the recipient of the luck of going viral. But then there's also ways of optimizing for small screens and for people with limited attention spans and using new technology that you can feed into your process to try to do things better, to try to get your message like more visible as a photographer. Yeah, optimization, I suppose, is what the word is. Yeah, but thanks. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much, Johnny. It was very inspiring and very touching and so emotional looking through the photographies and reflecting on where we've gone through and wondering where we're going to next as a collective and humanity perspective. So I'd like to ask you a question regarding your work and also further impacts, as you mentioned something about the AR and VR applications for afterwards, because my work is very much tied into citizen science. And it's a lot about, as you may know, in the US, recently they like to call it participatory science. And they also have engaged indigenous people in teaching them how to collect data and report on unequal environmental issues and help themselves to become more voiceable in terms of how they can influence policy. And in Europe, we also have this movement. But the difference is that in Europe, we have more collaborations, for example, the EU Horizon projects that are rather bringing together different countries together to do research innovation projects, and there we also implement citizen science and participatory science activities to give citizens and people who are not in the direct background of the knowledge to be part of scientific research or looking for data or evidence, like the amazing thing that you found for all of us. Do you see a chance in promoting or using citizen science or as a tool to engage people and being part of the solution to narrow inequalities, because I believe, as I'm totally biased because I'm totally a fan of narrowing down the gap between knowledge, because I think it all starts with a question of things and curiosity of wanting to know why. Why is it like this? Why is it so why is it making us so angry and emotional when we see these photos? So yeah, I'm really curious about how you think it's possible. Perhaps it's possible to, from an angle of solutions, to move this forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, let me just touch on the point that you said about curiosity. I think what I try to, when I create work, not just the Unequal Scenes work, but other projects that I have, what I try to do is uncover these hidden connections that exist. I think that's super fascinating to me as a curious person, as a photographer. So as a child, I wanted to be a plumber. I don't think that was really real, but I told my mom at one point, I remember saying, I want to be a plumber, because I was obsessed with this idea that there's pipes in this building right now that are all hidden. Well, some of them aren't hidden. And that's where like everything comes in and goes out of this building, but they're all hidden, right? But it's vital, and it's this infrastructure that underpins the world around us. Electricity is another one. I mean, just like these architectures, I suppose, for lack of a better word. And if you're a photographer, if you're using new technology, you may have a particular way into those hidden architectures that other people don't notice or can't see or don't think about. So there's that. I don't know if that's citizen science per se, but one thing that I also recommend to younger photographers also is like, try not to pander too much. Like, I understand as a self-employed person, pandering is important to put food on the table. But when you're creating projects and you're curious and you're passionate, one thing that's really important, I think, is to listen to your authentic inner voice. And if that means following the story into an uncomfortable place, or a place where people are telling you the opposite opinion of, I think you need to go there. So the idea that we already know what inequality looks like, you're better off served taking these drones and photographing Table Mountain and trying to go viral on YouTube, which is what everyone was doing at the time. I think the big lesson for me was that listening to my own sort of voice, trying to uncover some sort of hidden connection, specifically about how people were separated during apartheid, unlocked this big world where people were super thirsty about that type of image looking straight down, relevant in their lives. And that has led me into this like wider career, I guess. So if that's inspirational, then I'm happy. If it's not, then at least it worked for me. I don't have much to say about citizen science except to say I like science and I wish you all the best. And yes, absolutely, I think that that approach is good, more citizen science. Not to harp on Trump again, but one of the big things that he has done with this government is cut most NIH funding and almost all USAID funding, specifically for DEI type issues and international grants. A lot of the people I work with in Latin America and Africa have had their USAID or NIH grants funded by the US government cut completely in some cases, by a large percentage in other cases. And that's going to create a huge blind spot for the science going forward. I personally, as a US citizen, did not realize how much the US government funded NIH, well, medical research around the world. The total amount every year, I think I saw a stat, and someone can push back on this, it was something like 40 billion per year, and about 38 or 37 or something. It was a crazy percentage came from NIH grants. And then the next one was like Wellcome Trust from the UK. And then it was all these little slivers from like the Norwegian, you know, I'm sure Germany had a fund, and all these other funds that added up to total like 5 or 6% of the total. So the amount of opportunity that provides for countries to fund science who aren't aligned with democratic values also is part of the story. I was talking earlier about China, and no matter what you think about China, they definitely have a different set of values compared to most liberal democracies in the West. And they're really picking up the slack, I've noticed. So a lot of my friends who are researchers who now do not have any NIH money left are starting to turn to China. And what ramifications and impacts does that have in terms of what, you know, topics are being studied, how different types of populations are being educated about certain types of things in the next few years is gonna happen. There's a lot of knock-on effects that are interesting in the world of science. Anyways, thanks.
Hello, I'm Magda. Thank you very much. It's super touching. I personally come from Colombia, so I grew up in a country where you are facing and confronted with this reality on a daily basis. And yeah, I had the fortune to grow up in a family who was privileged from that point of view, but it's important to see what's going on. And sometimes, you know, like culturally speaking, you know, families are not really like facilitating this awareness and this gratefulness about, you know, your own situation, but also not the lack of others. So thank you that you came up with this by luck. And yeah, thanks for spreading the reality of our planet. My question to you is, you mentioned before that you feel yourself as being an agent that has, you know, interaction with different agents too. Have you come across any governmental, you know, group, be that at the local level or regional or country level, you know, to take more seriously these images and try to see how can you, through the visuals of the from the air, that you can also prove developments or you know, results of projects. I'm just curious if you have had any interaction at that level, because I think that a lot of that big change will come from the commitment from governments to change the status quo all over.
Thanks, Magda. Yeah, I agree with you. There's kind of two camps of people. There's the grassroots camp, and then there's the top-down camp, for lack of a better word. And I'm more into the top-down camp as well. I think issues of infrastructure and investment, we're talking trillions of euros that need to be invested in places to make cities more equitable. It just can't come from anyone but the top. It can't come from anyone but governments and, you know, private capital, private industry. So if I leverage my photos and my ability to sort of change people's ideas, I put my fulcrum more towards the higher side of things. The poor people in these photos know what's going on. It's always the rich people that go like, oh, I didn't realize it looked like that, inevitably. So there's that. You did say 1 inch. Oh, and then to answer your question, sure. Like United Nations, World Bank, IMF, the government of South Africa, all these fellowship programs, millions, not millions, but hundreds probably of master's, PhD, and grade school students. Every day I get emails from people saying they want to use it for a variety of reasons. So yeah, the images have really gone super into the consciousness. And the most interesting thing to me is when someone talks about my images to me, when I say I'm a photographer and I do like aerial work, they're like, yeah, there was this cool project I saw once about this guy who was going to do in unequal areas. And it's happened to me many times in my life where I kind of say that to me. So I know that it's filtered down into the consciousness in a lot of different ways. That's been helpful, even though sometimes funders will ask me kind of for like justification for certain things. Like, how many impressions do you have? Have you ever like changed a law or something with your photographs? And that's harder to say, but I know like in general, in a fuzzy sense, they have had hundreds of millions of impressions and been used by many, many government and non-government actors for sure. You did say something that I don't want to let go before we go to the next question, which is your family, which, forgive me if I'm mistaken, you alluded to being kind of like a more affluent part of the situation in Colombia. I mean, I grew up middle class, I think in the States, very middle class. Dad was a map maker for the government and mom was a homemaker until my brother left school, and then she became a teacher, a librarian. But one thing I've noticed is that talking about money and talking about privilege is very uncomfortable, even for middle class people, right? I think naturally people, when they see images like this, or you talk about poverty, especially in your home context, you know that it's bad in a way. You know that you make more and have more than other people, and therefore you want to sort of mitigate the emotional impact of talking about that by either ignoring it or by saying something like, well, we're really, I mean, like just scraping by. We're pretty middle class ourselves, right? So one of the things potentially that the images can do, and I've seen this happen in some contexts, it has to be facilitated in the right way, is to take the conversation of what everyone knows is happening, which is the fact that some people are making more than they should and some people are not having as much as they should, and put it into a relevant, sort of practical, low emotional state context that you can have a discussion about. And one of the things I think that you can see how my images maybe can bring down the temperature in the room is if you put them side by side with like portraits of people. If you put like a portrait of an African child or an Indian child like in a puddle crying with like scraps of food around them, I'm sure we've all seen these. That was how people, and still to this day, ask for money for like these charities and stuff like that. And then you put a picture of like Bombay or Mumbai with the slums next to the really rich apartment buildings. People will look at my images, the architectural images, and immediately cools them down. They're just kind of saying like, it's not right. But there's something that we can do to fix this, right? It's like a patterns issue. It's like an infrastructure issue. It's like an architecture issue. When you show them the portrait of the crying Indian or African, then it's like, oh, I don't know. Give them food, give them money, but it makes me feel uncomfortable. So there potentially is a way to emotionally engage with these topics, I think, as change makers, but also communicators. That's really important to remember, is that the audience has this emotional reaction to your work depending on how you shoot it and the images that you put in, right? And that's the whole canon of photography up until now. That's what you're dealing with, basically, and also people's emotional states. So I have noticed that sometimes also NGOs and governments will like my images too, because it removes themselves from their complicity from showing the human angle a little bit. People ask me, is the South African government okay with your images? I've been asked that a lot. And I go, surprisingly, yes. I've always thought that was a little strange that the South African government is so gung-ho without sharing my images. But I think it's because I'm focusing on these like huge, like citywide issues almost, that they can then pin on like the boogeyman of, you know, like corruption or, you know, things that we're trying to stamp out in government or on apartheid. So it's very easy for them to sort of misdirect the blame when they see my images. It's harder to do that when you see like a crying child or something. So they've been successful in licensing in terms of like being the business of a photographer that way as well for me, which has been useful.
So there may be more questions, but I think these are some nice final words, also emphasizing what impact the artistic element has in your pictures, how it touches people. And this is the very essence based on which we founded ourselves, to reach out to people more on an emotional level and use arts and culture as a leverage for change as well. And what we tried to do last time is to have some small group discussions. So if you have the patience and maybe turn around and speak to your neighbors that you wouldn't speak to otherwise, maybe in groups of 4 or 5s, just to discuss what you've observed and what maybe can be done to mitigate inequality in your immediate circles, where you may be from, or what you've learned from other cultures. And then we've got the space until about 10 o'clock. We've got enough drinks, so please stay and chat. And thanks again for coming. And oh yeah, okay, sure.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a thought when I was looking at your picture where you were showing the slum next to the suburb, like rich neighborhood. First look, what the impression you get is, okay, this is an inequality, this is bad. But I'm thinking, okay, maybe if I look closer at it, for example, like proximity is something which can help alleviate inequality issues, I would say. And so I was wondering what's kind of the reality in these neighborhoods of like, okay, do these people don't interact with each other at all? Is it maybe the children who are kind of curious about each other or stuff like that? And I was just curious about your experience on that.
Very perceptive question. Thank you. That's a very intelligent question to ask. And can I quickly show you one image here? You guys have all seen it. It's the Time magazine cover. When this went viral in 2018, 2019, I got an email from Marie Kirchmeier, and she was from the Wits University College of Architecture in Johannesburg. And she said, beautiful image, well done. So cool that you're on Time magazine. Do you realize how much damage you're doing to the movement of equity in South Africa with these images. And I was like, do you have me confused with someone else? Like, this is a project about inequality. I'm helping. She's like, no. She's like, in Johannesburg, these informal areas were settled by people who, I mean, let's say invaded or came into off-limits area to try to get closer to services, to try to get closer to the center of the city. These people were previously forced to live in faraway places because of the pass system during apartheid. And in 1994, they were finally able to move freely into the center of Johannesburg and set up shop here. And now all they have to do is take one minibus to their job instead of like 4 or whatever. And she was like, the city of Johannesburg is very conscious of images like this because it makes the city look bad. It makes South Africa look bad, basically. And they're going around and they're removing these informal settlements and they're putting them back out into the periphery. Cape Town is probably the city that's most known for that, but also Johannesburg. And it was a very interesting point, one that I hadn't considered up to that point, but you just also made it, which is these images can be read in a variety of ways, in a multiplicity of ways. And it's not so simple as to say, this is black people and that's white people. Actually, in this case, that's a colored neighborhood. Most people there are colored. And it's not so easy to say this is poor and this is rich, because these people in the South African context are fairly upper middle class, let's say, but they're not the richest. And some of these people here, I mean, even though they're poor, might not be the poorest either. There might be shop owners that live here. There might be property owners that live here and rent out other shacks. That's a pretty booming business in South African townships. And those people surprisingly make quite a bit of money compared to the South African income level. So maybe that's a better way to end, which is to say that, like, I am not the person who is going to have all the answers. One thing that the photographs can do, though, is provide a starting point to jump off and to have these conversations. So I hope that's the takeaway versus this project shows inequality is always equaling bad. So thank you. That's super important that you brought that up. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Tough answer to answer from the perspective of ChatGPT, but give me 1 second. No, I'm joking. I'm sure ChatGPT, and yes, of course, I've Googled myself and ChatGPT'd myself like everyone in here. It sees my images. I don't know how it translates image to text, which is how LLMs work, but somehow it takes that image and it translates it into something that it checks against a database, and it comes back with all the hits from all the things that have been uploaded into the internet for the last 7 years, and it spits back out at you what those people have said. I don't think I've not had the experience with ChatGPT where it has its own opinion per se. It kind of says what other people have said about the project in a more or less descriptive form. I guess I don't really know what you mean, but like if this video was put onto YouTube and YouTube was fed into the algorithm and transcribed, then perhaps ChatGPT then would have some of my intelligence in the data that it could then pull from and respond to people on. But I don't know. I think relying on ChatGPT for things like interpreting these images, it's like a dangerous road to go down a little bit also. So I'm hoping too many people aren't doing that. But you're right. To your point, maybe that some of the nuance of what these images say can be lost in a way of like, I'm doing a book report and I just need to report on this project, or I'm using ChatGPT real quick to just say like, what's the most unequal country in the world? And then it spits out this image and that's all you get. Yeah, you're missing something. You're missing the context. But I mean, you can't go into everyone's house and say to them exactly how they should do the proper research. So I'm hoping that like, through education and through curiosity, as the lady said, and just a variety of other reasons, like there's enough people finding some sort of relevance in the issues to want to go deeper and maybe listen to my TED talk or this talk or something like that, where they get more context.
Let's maybe discuss that over a glass of wine. But thanks for all the questions, and I love the debate, and we all need to make sure, you know, our recording goes viral on YouTube, so that hopefully your intelligence will move over to ChatGPT, and that way we'll all profit and learn more about it. So thanks again for a rich conversation. Thanks for joining us. And just one remark, one of our partner organizations, 𝗏𝗂𝗃 𝗏𝗃 will have a concert later this month on the 29th of September. There's some flyers. Pick them up. It's a matinee at 11 o'clock at the Symphony Hall, Philharmonie. And so yeah, we try to work with a range of different partners to get our message across, and hopefully make the world a better place through arts and aesthetics, and people like you who work very hard to show us things such as inequality. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.